describe a new thing, a genuine new thing that has tremendous value, and I think one of those is crowdsourcing. And talk a little about what crowdsourcing is, because it generated one of my favorite things in the world, which is Wikipedia. So.
Well, crowdsourcing is a term for outsourcing to the masses, a word that was in fact coined in Wired magazine in a desperate need for a headline, as is often the case amongst editors and writers, and was meant as a term to refer to the masses producing content, often for free, for a given platform, website. It can be anything from Wikipedia to Mechanical Turk, which is somewhat of a failed enterprise that was introduced by Amazon, where you might get paid half a cent for each photograph that you identified as being a photograph of a person or a place or a thing, something that might be useful to a company trying to do a lot of cataloging very quickly and very cheaply. Huh. Other examples of this, it goes to the other end of the spectrum. There's a company called Innocentive that will work with large corporations, such as Colgate-Palmolive, where that corporation has some sort of a problem that their R&D department is not able to solve, or is not able to do so immediately. For example, trying to get toothpaste into the tube efficiently. This was one that, in fact, Colgate gave to Innocentive, and Innocentive then posted it on the web, and anyone who had a solution could send in that solution, where whatever solution got used would result in a reward that had been prearranged by Colgate-Palmolive. And it was in the tens of thousands of dollars, I believe. And in fact, there was some retired man who had some idea about electrostatic technique that he had taken from who knows where, and it worked. And so he outdid the R&D department there. They saved an enormous amount of money. He made a little bit of money, and now we all have more toothpaste.
And then they decruded their entire R&D department. However, you know, the whole thing about crowdsourcing is sometimes crowds aren't really very intelligent, right? I mean, the whole presumption that the crowd was able to produce great video, for instance, has resulted in a lot of pretty terrible video on YouTube.
Well, it depends on whether you're speaking in statistical terms or whether you're speaking in terms of the actual content. I mean, I think that if we could watch the statistics as a sort of movie, it would actually be a very interesting one. And in a sense, that's what I do with Wikipedia as part of the work of trying to understand new words and how they come into being and what becomes of them. I use Wikipedia not as a source of information so much as a source of meta-information, namely, how do people understand new terminology and the science and technology behind it, rather than what is the baseline information.
Actually, something's happening with Wikipedia where they're taking it away from the crowd now, and there are a bunch of librarian types who are cleaning it up, right?
I wouldn't call them librarian types. Bullies actually might be a better term for it.
Yeah, they're sort of de-crowdsourcifying it.
Well, they're trying to. I mean, there's this interesting back and forth that takes place. The so-called Wikipedians, who perhaps are writing several hundred entries or several thousand even, who spend their days or more likely their nights writing these entries and quibbling with each other, definitely do not want others involved. And, of course, Wikipedian is a good example of jargon, and there's an awful lot of jargon as well that you start to find as you start combing through the history of a given word on Wikipedia, and that jargon is comprehensible only to said Wikipedians.
Yeah, Wikipedians, yeah. What's a life hacker?
Well, a life hacker is somebody who applies the same sort of approach that a hacker does to a computer or to a program, to life as a whole. So a hacker, in the old-fashioned sense of a word, would have perhaps spent a week writing a script that would make a task take half the time, though to have done the task in the full time would have taken only 5 minutes. So it started out, at least, the term life hacker and the idea started out with the idea that you would go about life in this sort of, ultimately this sort of aesthetic way. But inevitably, when lifehacker.com came along and was owned by Gawker, it sort of turned into a site where you could learn 6 ways to soft-boil an egg.
Yeah, which is also on, like, the Ladies' Home Journal site, so it's difficult to see where that's new,
Well, of course, that's what often happens with new words, is that they come to subsume more than just the realm that they came from initially, and ultimately they sort of swallow up too much, and they kind of get bloated to the point that they're not recognizable. And
come to the end of their usefulness, I mean, like, life hacking, I get it, but at some point it's just sort of playing with yourself.
Well, indeed, that is certainly...
There are other words for that, too,
There are, and some of them are jargon, some of them are slang, some jargon is slang and vice versa.
What's the difference between slang and jargon?
Jargon is slang in a suit.
That's a good one. Let's talk about texting for a minute, because the whole world of texting has changed everybody's life who texts. Of course, you don't text.
I have never, in fact, done so. I have spoken through a cell phone before, and the reception is very poor.
It is very poor, and gets worse as the machines get better, which is very weird. So give me an example of a piece of wordplay that's come out of texting.
Well, the single best piece of language, the single best word in text is the word K, which is a very useful abbreviation for the much longer word okay.
See, because okay is odiously long, and you need to just be K.
Well, it's interesting. Woodrow Wilson actually was rather anxious about okay being too short and being too simple, in a sense, in its origin. So he, having been the president of Princeton University before he was of the United States, attempted to give it a sort of respectability by saying that, in fact, it was an abbreviation for the letter for OKEH, which was it was a Native American term for an unspecified Native American tribe.
The OK tribe?
Indeed. There are endlessly many origin stories for OK.
They actually, founded the whole phrase, I'm okay, you're okay. No, they didn't.
I'm K, you're K.
I'm K, yeah, no, but Andrew Jackson actually was the author of the original OK. Did you say that in the book?
Well, in a very roundabout way. What I would recommend is a book written by someone else whose name I can't remember that is, I believe, coming out through Oxford as well. Is that correct? Yes. Yes, Alan Metcalf has written a book specifically answering your question.
Oh, I will be certain to get that. He's talked about Wired Magazine and Oxford Press. He's very, very good at that. All right, there's some really creepy stuff in here too. Like, for example, what's a spime?
A spime, well, a spime they don't exist, which is, to me, partly what's so interesting about them. They are hypothetical.
It's a word that was invented for something that doesn't exist, but that's what physics is all about, too. So
it is, in fact, I believe, what physics is all about, and there's another word in the book, unparticle, which is a term for a particle that somehow miraculously has the same mass at any scale. And what that means, nobody is quite sure, but that kind of goes along with the fact that nobody knows whether it exists. What's fascinating about a term like that in science and in technology, a term like spime, and a spime is an object that possesses sufficient intelligence and sufficient ability to communicate with all other objects that, in a sense, those objects all can kind of coexist without you. What's useful about these words is what is useful about science fiction, which is to say that there is a speculative quality that allows us to kind of reach out into the future in a what-if sort of way, and through the act of imagining that what-if, to then ask, do we really want spimes after all, or what would be the implications in the case of unparticle were particles to have this odd attribute, which can result in discoveries that have some degree of legitimacy for some period of time, often in the days or weeks.
So a spime would be like a chair that was able to know when you wanted to sit on it.
Well, or that would order new upholstery when it had worn out or when a new style of upholstery had come into fashion, because it would be able to read all of the blogs on interior decorating as well.
That would be really wonderful.
Well, this is also a matter of opinion, and I believe that we are all polarized by a term like that, and it starts a discussion.
I'm much more comfortable with spimes than I am with Twitter. So I'm
How about unparticles?
I don't even know. I don't want to get into that because we'll have a fight. Panglish. Are we in fact speaking something right now that's called Panglish?
I believe that we are. Panglish is a term that was coined by a linguist for English as it will be in the future, as non-native speakers become more numerous by orders of magnitude than native speakers, and as the language mutates to accommodate those speakers in terms of various ways that it might become simplified in conjugation, for instance, and also in terms of the many new words that might be introduced from other languages. But honestly, that has always been the case, and that's what makes it English.
Well, you talk about, I forget who the writer was, but it's in like the 13th century, somebody was complaining there's way too much French around.
Yes, indeed. In fact, there is a version of the Gospel according to Matthew that has been corrected to be truly English. And, for example, crucified has been changed to crossed. This version has not been especially popular.
No.
But I think that speaks to the fact that not only is language always evolving, but that we are always in the language as it has evolved to such an extent that we don't recognize that evolution and therefore call into question whatever is happening next, just as those in the past called into question what we take for granted.
The whole idea of Panglish has been greeted with some sort of jingoistic hatred by some folks, right?
It really is pretty remarkable. The letters to the editor in various newspapers when a headline story went out. So the term Panglish is interesting as well because this linguist also was somewhat of a frustrated novelist who had used the word Panglish in a science fiction book, and while interviewed by New Scientist, decided to throw the word in with the meaning that I've suggested, though with a great deal of hesitation, and as a result, the editors rightfully, or the writer rightfully, buried it in the 47th paragraph of the story. But the word Panglish caught the eye of some editor at some newspaper like the Mirror or the Inquirer, and they made it into a headline that the language of Shakespeare is going to be overtaken by Panglish. And suddenly it was headline news everywhere. This word had kind of put itself into the world through a combination of the baiting that editors inevitably need to undertake in order to get their newspapers read, and the bait being taken by all of the various jingoistic readers, one of whom said that English is now being taught by non-native speakers like Irishmen. And that gives you a sense of the sensibility of those who despise Panglish. Perhaps, would you like me to read?
Yeah, that would be good.
So I thought that I would just read two paragraphs here.